Welcome back to Normal Island Live. I'm Lewis, and yes, we are late. It is Lewis's show. I am always late, but in all fairness, I have moved house in the last week. I've just got back from Vienna last night at 1 a.m., and it might look like I'm in a nice room behind me right now, but what you can't see is thousands of boxes surrounding me as I struggle to find the correct wires and cables and everything that I needed today. But thank you for everybody's patience. We are joined tonight by Samuel K. Samuel, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks. And congratulations. I didn't know you had moved. Congratulations on the move.
Yeah, I'm back up in Leeds now. Leeds is where I'm from. Lived in London for the last 2 years. Back up in Leeds just for a little bit while I steady myself. I'm newly self-employed, and it's very hard to get a flat in London as a newly self-employed person because they
Yeah.
either want a guarantor or 6 months rent, which in
Yeah.
London is about 7 or 8 grand. Don't have that money. Don't have that money.
Yeah.
How about you? How's your week going so far?
Yeah. And by the way, very relatable about the London rental market. I mean, just crazy. I'm doing okay, as good as one can be in this crazy world that we seem to be living in. It seems to be spiraling every single day. Every single notification is quite crazy related to obviously this Iran war, but obviously we're going to talk about on that on the show. So
Yeah, my friend didn't appreciate me in Vienna being every 5 minutes on my phone, and I'm like, guy, like World War III's breaking out. I can't get off my phone. All the notifications coming through.
tough.
But had kind of a little break. Managed to post less and disconnect from the news, but now we're fully back into it. So let's get on with tonight's show. So coming up on tonight's show, we're going to be talking about Iran's plan, or what it seems to be a plan, to hold a knife to the world's economy. Keir Starmer is attacked from pretty much all sides in the UK over Iran, and Shabana Mahmood is still chasing right-wing voters by clamping down on asylum seekers. Same old stories. Just remember, obviously, you can help us grow by visiting turnleftmedia.co.uk/support to help fund our work, or by becoming a YouTube member. But let's jump into story one. It's just a little kind of like debrief of what's happened over the last 5 days. We are now 5 days into the war triggered by the US and Israeli strikes on Iran. And as we've seen, the conflict has expanded across the Middle East as Iran continues launching missiles and drones at multiple countries hosting American forces or allied infrastructure, and as the US and Israel continue to attack Iran with no actual purpose, apparently. They've given like three different excuses why they're doing it, and none of them really seems to be completely sticking. Since the attacks on Iran, which began on the 28th of February, Tehran has fired hundreds of ballistic missiles and large drone swarms at targets across the region. Countries confirmed to have been attacked so far, and please put in the comments if we've missed any. Maybe there's a new one over the last few hours. Obviously includes Israel, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Jordan, as well as obviously Western military bases. As we know, obviously the base in Cyprus got attacked as well. Many of the strikes have targeted US air bases, foreign ports, energy infrastructure, and also the attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz, which multiple outlets are kind of reporting today saying they've basically kind of done it. Like the odd ship is still kind of getting through, but they've effectively now kind of shut it down as of today. Which is going to have a massive and huge global impact on trade, which we will come to very shortly. But they've also attacked hotels, airports, and also residential buildings. All the while, Israel has faced obviously repeated missile barrages from Iran and also Hezbollah in Lebanon, which has now led to the ground invasion by Israel in southern Lebanon, a territory many Israelis believe is actually theirs, which they have occupied before, and many suspect this could again lead to a permanent occupation. Because I believe I didn't put it in the notes, but I'm pretty sure when Israel Katz announced the invasion the other day, they said that they have instructed their soldiers to occupy the land indefinitely, I think was the words, but maybe somebody can correct me on that quote. I'm doing it off the top of my head. Now, the scale of the attacks is becoming clearer as governments continue to release interception data, because it is interesting to kind of see who's been targeted and how much. In the UAE alone, officials have said that they detected 189 ballistic missiles, 941 drones. This was updated as of a few hours ago. It might be slightly out of date right now, most of which were intercepted, but some obviously caused damage. Iran has continued launching new waves of attacks. Just on Wednesday alone, Iranian Revolutionary Guard forces have said that they fired another 40 missiles at US and Israeli targets as part of their latest phase of retaliation. Now, casualty numbers, again, it's not completely accurate. We don't have completely up-to-date numbers, but their region, obviously, it remains uncertain as we kind of really understand what's been hit. Some organizations and governments are releasing very specific dates, like the UAE, and some we just don't know about. We sometimes only know about the ones that have actually struck. There's been many that have been intercepted, which just aren't being reported on because there is just too much happening. US officials say several American troops have been killed, while deaths and injuries have also been reported in other Gulf states struck by missiles. And obviously, there has been deaths in Israel too. And obviously, onto Iran, which, the destruction there has been far more extensive than anywhere else. The United States and Israel have continued to carry out their large scale bombing operations, hitting military facilities, missile launch sites, naval vessels, and security compounds. US military officials say that they've, struck 2,000 targets in Iran so far. And again, that's probably out of date by the time I put these notes together. They've continued to attack their air defense and systems and Revolutionary Guard installations. But casualties in Iran are also mounting, with Al Jazeera reporting just a few hours ago that it's now topped 1,000. But again, that's the official account. There's probably much, much more, which is an expression that we've commonly used now over the last few years. But of course, we have obviously the most devastating incident with an update, which occurred in the southern city of Manab, where a girls' elementary school was attacked during the airstrikes. And as of today, it's now been reported at least 150 people were killed in that strike. Obviously, most of them children, and many of the others were teachers and staff at the school. We still don't know why they struck this. Well, many people can say why, but the official statement from Israel is basically nothing so far. We haven't really heard anything about this. They're trying to obviously distract away from this. Now, the political shock inside of Iran has been equally dramatic. Reports suggest that Israel even struck a building in the Iranian city of Qom, I think it's pronounced, where senior clerics were meeting to discuss and to choose the next supreme leader. And Iranian insiders are saying that Khamenei's son, Mojtaba, is emerging as the likely successor, though the decision is not being formally announced, mostly because they think if they formally announce it, he's just going to become the number one target. It was apparently done over Zoom, actually, because after they originally struck the clerics and killed many of them, they then later met over Zoom, which again, it just sounds weird in this time, just talking about such things, right? You associate Zoom with things like COVID and obviously another unprecedented time. But when you're talking about, clerics meeting over a Zoom call to discuss who their next leader is, it just seems like a very weird reality what we're living. I don't know any other way to describe it. But back on to Iranian targets, because it seems that their plan is basically this: it's holding a knife to the throat of the global economy. They know that they can't obviously take on the US or Israel or the Gulf states, but what they can do is cause extreme economic damage to the world, attacking airports, hotels. That scares the tourists while going after energy, infrastructure, and global shipping, strangles the world's economy. And hey, maybe all of this could have been, avoided if Trump didn't, rip up the Iran nuclear deal in his first term, which, he didn't even really understand what it is. He was just told, this is bad, let's get rid of it, by some very crappy and terrible advisors who are just generally warmongers. I think at the time it was actually still John Bolton, who was obviously now has he been arrested? Did he get arrested? I know his house got searched. I can't even keep up with the political targets that Trump is now going after. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, again, the world is getting punished for the actions of very rich and powerful men, and the poorest people are going to be punished by this around the globe because it's them who are going to continue to be affected by these economic circumstances out of anybody else because of very rich and powerful men's wars that just continue to affect everyone else, but apparently them. Samuel, bring you in. It's more of kind of like there isn't a specific topic on this part specifically. We will come on to something more specific soon to do with like the UK, Keir Starmer, Donald Trump. But I'm just wanting to know your thoughts. Right, it's been 5 days. All of this has happened. There's been lots of discussions about what could have been done, what should have been done, the effects of what is going to happen, where it could go, where it might lead. I'm just wanting to know 5 days in, like, what are your thoughts on all of this? Like, where people are seeing it, where you're seeing it. Kind of an open question, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said earlier about Trump not fully understanding what the Iran nuclear agreement was, or not even trying to understand it, I think sums up where we are. I remember back in 2018, 2019, thinking, what on earth is going on? Why is he ripping up all these agreements? But, fast forward to 2026 and the known connections with Epstein that he has, all of this seems to me to be something that's on two fronts. You have obviously the transparency, well, call it transparency with the donations that have been made to Trump and the Republicans from APAC and all these groups that are pro-Israel. But I think the other element that I think people are starting to come into is this Epstein connection and what Israel could potentially have on Trump. And I think that's a very interesting avenue to explore. And I think a lot more is going to come out on that in the next coming weeks. I think that obviously Trump is trying to distract away from the Epstein files. I think there was a report showing that his the Epstein files and all the things related to that was in the news and the top story for weeks on end. And obviously Trump is trying to distract away from that and make sure that the news isn't on that anymore. So I think this is also part of what we're seeing. But my ultimate thoughts on this is that Trump is compromised. I think he's a compromised person. And I think that there is potentially something that Israel may have on him.
There's some suggestions that there's some evidence of that in the files, potentially. I think there was a report from a confidential informant saying that he might have been compromised. But again, there's just so much in the files, and yet we're still going to continue to find out so much more as people dig into them more and make more connections. But do you think that even without the files, this would have happened anyway? Because I do. Like, I think it's a welcome distraction for Trump. I think it's, somewhere to direct the attention. And despite the fact that it's still, I don't know if it's still kind of working, right? Hillary Clinton going viral at the closed deposition just the other day, and now Bill Clinton's clips are coming out. I saw in the news yesterday, and again, I didn't include it in today's stories, but if anybody didn't know, that's I think 7 people have agreed who are implicated potentially in the files to, be seen before a congressional committee over the next few months. The dates and names of those people have been released. I'm not going to say them because I can't remember them off by heart. One of them, I believe, is Bill Gates. So it's not really going anywhere. So if we were to go by that theory, I think he'd need a world war to really fully distract from what it is. But do you think like that's the main motivation, or do you think it's something that's welcome, or do you think this would have just happened anyway? Because I'm on the side of like, this is America, right? This is Israel. I think this would have just happened anyway, even without the Epstein files. But that's
Well, I
me.
think this has been a long-term project. We know, obviously, with Israel and the Greater Israel Project, which is essentially to cover more areas of the Middle East and expand its territories. I think this has been a long time coming. And I think in Trump, they finally found, in my view, a president compromised and weak enough to carry out these objectives to the fullest extent. A lot of these things are laid out in Project 2025. And I think that Israel, as a state, as an entity, has been looking and waiting for someone who they can completely control. Because I think a lot of presidents in the past have obviously been on the axis of Israel. They wanted to protect Israel's interests in the Middle East, but perhaps not go as far as launch a full-scale war on behalf of on behalf of Israel. And I think what you've seen with Trump is somebody, in my view, who is compromised enough and stupid enough. And I also think that, there's been some talk about how he might be on a relative sugar high, if as it were, from the obviously the adventures in Venezuela. You had he's basically feeling immune to consequences, and to a large extent he has been, especially with that Supreme Court ruling back when it was 2024, 2025. Point being, I think that Israel, this is fundamentally part of a larger Israeli project to expand its territories in the Middle East, and it feels very threatened by any competitor in the region, which it sees in Iran. And the fact that Iran is now sort of striking back it's all making for a very tense situation in the Middle East, which many experts had predicted.
I think what's also interesting as well, and I always like to point this out when I get the opportunity, is that Pete Hegseth, the guy who is now the Secretary of War, what was the Secretary of Defense, in charge of a budget of what is it, like 1.1, $1.2 trillion military. He wrote a book in I think it was like 2022, 2023, called The American Crusade, right? And in that book, he talked about how, Islam is basically like the biggest threat to the world. He even in his book, he went as far to mention places in the UK like Bingley, Bradford, Leicester, to talk about how they've been, over those American talking points, there's no-go zones and they've been overrun. And I think it wasn't just JD Vance, who I think famously said, the UK will be the first country where Muslims will have a nuclear bomb. It's basically saying that they're going to take us over and take our nuclear bombs. But again, that's not true because Pakistan has nuclear bombs. But in his book, he continues to say that we're going to have to essentially subvert democracy in the future. He says that there will be a civil war, basically between the left and the good American citizens, and they will have to purge the Muslims from America and from Europe. And the book goes much deeper than that. There's a lot more, and I would recommend that. Just literally Google the Wikipedia page of the book. There's many extracts of quotes from that book, and you can kind of get into the mindset of the guy who's, in charge of the most powerful military in the world. And what more interesting, I don't know if
There's
you've
also the
seen.
small issue of these white supremacist tattoos. I'm not sure if you've seen that
Yeah,
story
I've
as
heard
well.
about
There's
these.
also the small issue that he's literally a raging white supremacist,
Hmm.
who's in charge of the most powerful military on earth. But sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. There's many places we can go with Peter Hegseth. Everything from his tattoos, everything to the reports that he's a drunk, a wife beater, that he has been accused of domestic abuse. His mother reportedly, published a letter which said how dangerous he is, and just combining all of these things into a person, a potential drunk white supremacist, anti-Islam, genocidal rhetoric, which is what's in his book. He's now in charge of the military. And I think that's got to definitely play a big part in it as well. Just the idea of somebody like him pushing and pushing and pushing for this, and he speaks very positively about Israel, but not even from like the almost like cliche, bought and paid for APAC type of funded. Like he speaks about it from a very fundamentalist, ideological, religious kind of point of view. Um, and I can't help but think that again, this is a part of it. And I don't know if you've also seen as well, Samuel, about like there's been many quotes over the last few days from some of the leading figures in the Trump administration talking about almost like invoking scripture when talking about this. I don't know if you've seen any of
Don't
this.
get me start. I mean, I'm actually planning on doing a video on that tomorrow. I plan to do it today, but I had so much to do. It's very frightening, and I it's very difficult for me to speak about this sometimes because I actually come from I'm not Christian anymore, but I come from an evangelical background actually. So this language of end time prophecy of Armageddon and everything is very familiar to me. And to understand, and so obviously as I've come out of religion, so it's kind of feels a bit liberating. But then to kind of come full circle and see that the most powerful sort of military on earth now has people in its ranks who not only subscribe to this, but are actively pushing for end time prophecy to be fulfilled, which essentially means entering a large scale war. And the people who pay the price are the civilians, are the innocent working class civilians who are trying to go about their lives, who get dragged into these crazy theological imaginations of people. And I feel for them the most because these stories show that when we're not dealing with people who you can have a rational conversation, you can kind of get somewhere with, in my experience, these kinds of people are not very reachable, at least in the immediate sense. They have a certain goal in mind. They're not open to reason or discourse. They have a particular script that they think needs to play out. So therefore, they're going to work to make that happen, which is a very scary prospect.
Yeah, like I think any type of rhetoric like this, you don't even obviously need religion to invoke any sort of, genocidal, ethnic cleansing type of rhetoric that we've seen in the past. Or even though often they do obviously usually intersect. But even still, when you add genocidal rhetoric, when you add the idea of that to people quoting scripture, people invoking God or gods, it should be a time that everyone's terrified, especially when we're talking about, the most powerful country in the world. And obviously, it's the globalization aspect of it as well. Is that not only is America the most powerful military in the world, they are heavily weaponizing the concept of globalization, the fact that they have so much power over the markets or so much power to threaten people, whether it's Spain saying that we're going to do a blockade and stop trading with you if you don't let us use
So
our
many
bases.
bases around the world. Yeah, so many bases around the world
Yeah.
that threatens the national sovereignty of all these places.
I think all I can hope for in the future, Samuel, is everybody's going to watch what's happened over the last few years and whatever will happen in the what we in now March. Less just under 3 years left of Trump, and slowly start to peel away from like the system that we're currently in, where the US has so much power over us. But we will see. We will see. But for now, we're going to continue around. It's going to be the basic theme of the show until we get to the Shabana Mahmood story last. But let us continue. The European Central Bank economist has warned of inflation due to the illegal war in Iran. Now, whilst we are still living in a cost of living crisis, unprecedented is the word that constantly comes to mind, and I'm fed up of hearing it, but we have to throw it out there. We may also now have to face higher food bills. Sorry, my screen has gone a bit weird. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. Oh, here we go. So they've said that prolonged war in the Middle East and a persistent fall in oil and gas supplies from the region could cause a substantial spike in inflation and a sharp drop in output in the Eurozone, the European Central Bank's chief economist has warned. Doesn't that sound very familiar, guys? Sounds very familiar to Ukraine and Russia as well. Another unprecedented time. In an interview with the FT, Philip Lane said that directionally, a jump in energy prices puts upwards pressure on inflation, especially in the near term, and that such development would be negative for growth. Now, European gas prices shot up almost 50% at one point on Monday after Qatar halted liquefied natural gas production following strikes from Iran, which has come under attack from the US and Israel since Saturday. And as if we don't have to worry enough, the US and Israel are making sure that we may be facing tougher living standards, all for their wars. Now, earlier today, Curtis Daly caught up with economist James Medway to discuss the potential economic shocks from the war.
To start off, what are the likely impacts of the Iran war going to be for British consumers? What products and services are most likely to be affected?
I mean, kind of everything. It depends on how long this lasts for, right? Trump is talking about 4 weeks. I mean, that's probably enough to actually start seeing some impact from all of this. But essentially, everything could be affected by what's happening here. And the reason everything is affected is because what's happened just in the last few days is that both the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 20% of the world's oil and natural gas flows, and the Bab el-Mandab Straits, which is the place that the Houthi movement from Yemen has been attacking over the last few years until a peace deal early last year, is also sort of blockaded, and various shipping companies are diverting away from it. That means these two choke points for like global trade, those places where a great deal of everything we trade around the world, in this case oil and gas on one side and containers full of goods and food and all sorts of things going particularly from Asia to Europe on the other side, are now effectively closed. On top of that, the world's major shipping insurers have said they won't insure ships going into the Persian Gulf full stop. So this is all closed down. So these are two of the world's major trade routes are just shut as of now, and at least one of them carries some goods, which is natural gas, in particular natural gas. No one focuses on oil, but it's natural gas you really need to keep an eye on, and oil as well, and that's closed. So kind of everything after a while will start to get more expensive. It's just a question of how quickly that happens. The really dramatic shock, if this drags on, because who knows, maybe the war's over by tomorrow or next week or something, seems unlikely, but okay. If this drags on, the really dramatic shock is most likely going to come through on the side of domestic energy bills, with the impact on household prices for like what happens when you turn the electricity and what happens when you turn the gas on for heating in particular. The next round of increases on the energy price cap, which regulates the price for most households in Britain. So there's a bit of a reduction during April. It's now looking like, if this carries on, a very significant increase in July. Goldman Sachs reckon that a 4-week closure of the Strait of Hormuz would be mean that gas prices in Europe go up about 130%. Which is a very, very substantial increase. So what you'd be looking at is a reaching upwards of a cost of living crisis that never really went away. So I'm sorry not to like give you better news on this. If things end quickly, this all looks better. It doesn't look like this is going to end quickly.
No, I agree with you. I don't think it will. And Iran is, putting up a strong fight. We had price shocks and inflation when it came to the war in Ukraine. How does this compare in severity in terms of price shocks? Is it going to be worse? Can you tell us that?
This again depends on that slightly unknown question of duration, right? So how long all this carries on for? What Iran is doing at the minute, it's retaliation for this illegal attack actually by the US and Israel, is to sort of lash out to all the sort of sore spots that it can get to, with its various weapons over the last few days. And this includes, in particular, the Strait of Hormuz being closed and getting its allies to also close the Bab el-Mandab Strait on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula. These are the two biggies. But it's also like these sort of knock-on impacts on things like the airport at Dubai getting closed. There's various sort of bits and pieces around the Gulf that it's managed to attack. Oil refinery the biggest oil refinery that Saudi Arabia has been attacked. The Qatar's closed its two biggest gas refining terminals. These produce 20% of the world's natural gas. I mean, these are very, very substantial impacts, which on paper, if this drags on, you would anticipate is bigger than the kind of shock we saw after the Russian invasion of Ukraine a few years ago.
So, of course, apart from changing our entire energy system to renewables, I think that's the goal. What policies would you like to see from the government right now to at least attempt to tackle the potential price increases?
Well, not just energy systems, the other vulnerabilities, food systems, by the way, that we import about 40% of the food we eat, but we rely very heavily on imported fertilizers, some of which comes through the good old Bab el-Mandab Strait, some of which is, well, all of it actually is dependent on oil in the production of artificial fertilizers. It's a very sort of energy intensive and chemical intensive process, and we import a great deal of that. There's only one factory still producing fertilizer left in Britain. So these impacts start to feed through in lots and lots of different ways here. So it's energy and food. Over the longer term, we need to be less import dependent on both of these things. Renewables is one side of that. Supporting more homegrown agriculture is the other side of that. That can't happen all at once. In the short term, I think what the government ought to be looking at doing is ways to protect households from upcoming price surges. On the energy price, there's now a whole load of really good policy ideas out there and a lot of experience from the surge a few years ago on how to fairly balance this increase in the international cost of energy, which we're importing. We import about half the natural gas we use for heating our homes, burning for electricity. That's a really big exposure. So you want to protect households from that, and you want to do it in a way that isn't just making sure if you're very rich, you're protected just as much as if you're, don't have so much money out there. You want to make sure the system's fair. There's a number of good proposals doing the rounds. Block pricing is the thing that's introduced, but they basically involve the government stepping in and saying, we're going to put a cap on this. We're going to stop that price moving for domestic consumers in the way that it would do if you're just exposed to the international system. That's actually expensive. You can rinse out some of the profits from fossil fuel companies, from suppliers of natural gas. Frankly, I think there's a good case. If you go and look at what's happened to British Aerospace Systems profits over the last year or so, well up, and they're going to go up from this point onwards. I think there's a good case of saying we can take some of the super profits of arms manufacturers to cover some of the costs there. But that's a case for government intervention, and government intervention in quite a dramatic fashion in terms of like neoliberalism, the ideology of free markets, privatization, all this sort of stuff. That's not going to protect people. We can't rely on a free market to protect people in a situation like this, because what a free market delivers, absolutely undoubtedly, we know this already, is if there's a big old supply shock, that's rising prices and somebody else profiteering. That's what happened after Russia invaded Ukraine. That's what's going to happen after this. So you want to cut that out. That means a big intervention right now into critical markets like household energy and gas supplies. That's what the government needs to be looking at immediately.
I mean, obviously, I agree with that. Of course, there needs to be government intervention. And essentially, what you're saying is that the government will need to absorb the shocks of the price increases. And you're saying part of that is from the profits of the big sort of energy companies. If they don't recoup all of that money, would they be looking? I mean, I'm not saying they're going to do this, but if they did, would they be looking at tax rises to cover the rest of it?
I think you'd be looking at, it depends who pays the tax. I mean, that's the question here, right? What you're talking about with some of this stuff is windfall tax on energy profits, windfall tax effectively on arms manufacturer profits. There's a few other places you can start to get to on this. Over the longer term, you want that big industrial strategy, that big overhaul of the entire energy system, basically to get you into domestically produced renewable energy production. This is the most secure thing that we can get out there that gets us out of, the exposure to international shocks like this. That's where you want to get to. That is years down the line. I mean, we actually have got some distance there, but it means also overhauling our, tweaking domestic grid designed for a world of fossil fuel and centralized production of fossil fuel, not decentralized renewable energy production. So that's a big old investment. We're not going to be able to do all of these things without also getting a bit more serious about what does redistribution look like. This is why talk of a wealth tax, I think, is so important, because actually it's not just like the day-to-day spending of government. We need to redesign, reconfigure what the economy looks like. And if you're serious about doing that, it has to be thinking about how you redistribute resources from where it's been hoarded right at the top of society in lots and lots of different forms. And you take those resources and you find ways to spend it on stuff that will protect people in a world that is increasingly insecure.
I suppose then politically, you've got the Green Party who are saying we don't want to get involved in this illegal war up, completely. Hannah Spence and other Green MPs have co-sponsored a motion with Jeremy Corbyn saying at least there needs to be parliamentary oversight. Then you've got Keir Starmer who, hasn't gone full-blown Tony Blair, but has said and has allowed the US to use UK military bases, despite the fact that polling shows people don't want that. And then you've got Reform, who are saying, let's, full blown go into this. So how badly do you think Reform have screwed up by supporting this war?
Oh, I think this is going to be a real mistake for them. And they keep making these mistakes and they all land in kind of the same direction because its Reform has gone from, if you think about Nigel Farage, 12 months ago, there he was popping up outside Steelworks, British Steelworks in Scunthorpe. Yeah, I'll nationalise that. Telling people in old mining villages that he was a secret supporter of Arthur Scargill all along. Yeah, all this sort of stuff. That's all gone. It's straight back to like, actually, we're going to recruit a load of essentially has-been politicians from the Conservative Party. We're going to listen closely to some big money donors. And there was a really interesting report basically on a leaked account of a meeting Nigel Farage had with those big money donors before Christmas about what they were saying they wanted from him. And now we've got this massive turn. Again, follow the money in this one in favor of whatever Donald Trump does, whatever the US does. Nigel Farage is going to outpoodle even Keir Starmer on this. And I don't think this is going to go down well at all with a great layer of people who might be thinking about voting Reform. I mean, you could see it actually in the by-election just gone in Gorton Denton. 2 days before, you had Richard Tice popping up and saying, hey, do you know what? We're going to reintroduce the two-child benefit cap. How's that going to go down in a place like Gorton Denton in Manchester 2 days before? You were out there saying, yeah, we're champions of the working class. No, you're not. You're champions of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, the layer of unpleasant, wealthy people, very wealthy people, the extreme rich, some of them in this country. That's what Reform's representing. I don't think it's going to go well for them at all. And this war, by the way, I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen. We don't know if the US and Israel know something more than the rest of us. I mean, you kind of assume they must know something, but God knows at this point. You don't know that the Iranian regime isn't going to collapse. It's all going to be sweetness and light from here on in. I mean, that's the kind of fantasy world they're presenting. Okay, maybe that happens. And then Nigel Farage can sail on. But to me, this looks like getting entangled into a war that's going to drag out for a long period of time with consequences most obviously and horribly in the region itself, in the Middle East itself, in Iran itself, but then also the knock-on consequences over here, which is soaring bills for most people for a war that Nigel Farage is 100% supporting.
Yeah, and it seems like the Green Party would benefit from this. Now, I don't want to say, the horrific thing is happening, of course, and people's lives are at stake here. So we don't want to say a political party is getting capital from it. But I think it is true in the sense that, look, I mean, it makes the argument for the Green Party policies of transforming our energy systems. But even before that, simply renationalizing our energy to protect any potential price increases, for example. This makes the case for the Green Party policy, doesn't it? Because Reform are not talking about like people's material needs, lowering bills, for example. They're calling for war. Labour have been pretty inept. So the Greens have a very, very strong argument. And of course, they have that anti-war stance thrown in there too.
Look, I mean, rather than, makes the case of the party, it makes a case of the policy. Like, Keir Starmer can change this tomorrow. He can change it this afternoon if he wants to. And that is probably what we need to argue for. Because in the end, it doesn't actually matter who's in charge if they're doing the right thing. If Keir Starmer suddenly turns around and says, OK, but we're not going to... the minute he's getting shot by both sides rather than this one, he's like half in, half out. Donald Trump says, oh, he's no Winston Churchill. I mean, it's taking the obvious, right? But on the other side, anybody who actually opposes the war is saying, what are you doing with this half-cocked? OK, you can use the bases a little bit. That doesn't work, right? So just be clear about it, clear about where we're going with this, and put in some policies that's actually going to protect people from what we think not unreasonably, is going to be an almighty great surge in prices of essentials over the next few months or so. He could do that tomorrow. He's the Prime Minister. He can, for once in his life, make an actual decision that he's not going to back out of and do something about it. And that's what we need to argue for. Leave the party politics to one side in this. Let's get the policy right. And if the Greens are saying the right policy, fine, good for them. But let's see the government actually do the right thing.
Sorry about that. I think I popped back up for a second then. That was Curtis with economist James Medway, who has a podcast called Macrodose. Please go and check it out. Now, just to continue, obviously, the Iran topic, and we will eventually come to something regarding just the UK and nothing else. Well, everything ties back to international apparently nowadays, but we will continue. I'm going to bring it over to the UK and start with this clip from Donald Trump.
What exactly was the imminent?
You've asked, or not your turn. Not your turn, please.
Mr. President, are you going to take the heat off the Europeans to potentially help you? Mark Rutte called on the allies to also help you.
What does that mean?
Well, you have to ask Mark Rutte. He said not as part of NATO, but to be helpful to you in this.
Well, some of the European nations have been helpful and some haven't. And I'm, very surprised. Germany's been great. He's been terrific. Others have been very good, terrific. I think that the head of NATO, Mark, is fantastic. Okay, Mark Rutte. I think he's fantastic. But some of the European, like Spain, has been terrible. In fact, I told Scott to cut off all dealings with Spain.
I want to welcome in our viewers who are joining us on the main network right now in Quebec and in Ontario. You're listening to President Donald Trump speaking inside the Oval Office right now with an update on Iran.
Germany, everybody. And Spain didn't do it. And now Spain actually said that we can't use their bases. And that's all right. We don't want to. We could use their base if we want. We could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it. But we don't have to. But they were unfriendly. And so I told him we don't want. Spain has absolutely nothing that we need other than great people. They have great people, but they don't have great leadership. And as you know, they were the only country that in NATO would not agree to go up to 5%. I don't think they would have agreed to go up to anything. They wanted to keep it at 2%, and they don't pay the 2%. So we're going to cut off all trade with Spain. We don't want anything to do with Spain. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not happy with the UK either. That island that you read about, the lease, okay, he made it for whatever reason, he made a lease of the island. Somebody came and took it away from him. And it's taken 3-4 days for us to work out where we can land there. It would have been much more convenient landing there as opposed to flying many extra hours. So we are very surprised. This is not Winston Churchill that we're dealing with.
Well, the comment section right now is hilarious. Just everyone just ripping into the White House. By the way, the sound quality is from the news station, not us. Just saying. Now, as we know, Starmer was initially threatened before the strikes on Iran for not letting the US use UK bases to strike Iran, which, let's be fair, I think he deserves some credit for that. And then he was threatened with the Chagos deal to be thrown out again by Trump if he didn't obey to Uncle Sam, and still, at that point, did not relent. Then, as the war started, he still declined to allow the use of bases, but then finally relented, as we all know. And then almost immediately, the UK base in Cyprus was attacked. And it's still unclear whether it was Iran or Hezbollah, but it doesn't really matter anyway. He immediately got huge backlash and was accused of dragging us into the war. And now today, he responded in Parliament with this statement.
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom was not involved in the initial strikes on Iran by the US and Israel. That decision was deliberate. We believe that the best way forward for the region and for the world is a negotiated settlement. President Trump has expressed his disagreement with our decision not to get involved in the initial strikes. But it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That is what I've done, and I stand by it. Mr. Speaker, it is important for me to say that our bases in Cyprus are not being used by US bombers. the security of our friends and partners in Cyprus is of critical importance. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear. The strike on RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus was not in response to any decision that we have taken. It is very clear that the death of the Supreme Leader will not stop Iran from launching these strikes. In fact, their approach is becoming even more reckless and more dangerous to civilians. They are working ruthlessly and deliberately through a plan to strike not only military targets, but also economic targets in the region, with no regard for civilian casualties. The only way to stop the threat is to destroy the missiles at source, in their storage depots or at the launchers. The US requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose because they have the capabilities to do so. Yesterday evening, we took the decision to accept that new request in order to prevent Iran firing missiles across the region. To be clear, the use of British bases is limited to the agreed defensive purposes. We are not joining the US and Israeli offensive strikes.
No matter what he does, he cannot win. And I'm not even saying this to try and like defend him, right? You know, I said before when he first stood up to Trump and the Trump administration saying, no, you can't use the bases before the strikes. And even immediately after the strikes, they were still saying no. Then people were saying, you know, they're happy with him. I was happy that he wasn't letting them use the bases. It's good. We don't want to get dragged into this. And then obviously he lets, you know, some use of the bases. We immediately get attacked, which he then, I don't know what their intel is. They haven't shared it. They're saying in that clip there, Starmer said that, you know, the use of defensive purposes for the base did not lead to us getting attacked. Well, what did then? Because no British assets were attacked up until that base was allowed to be used, and then it happened almost immediately after. And then obviously, you know, he's then pissed off the people who were initially saying it's good that he's not letting them use the bases. And then he pissed off the people initially who wanted him to allow the Americans to use the bases. And then once he's let them use the bases, you've got everyone from, you know, Kemi to Farage, basically egging him on to even join in, along with the, you know, entire right-wing media ecosystem, from hard right mainstream wanting us to, you know, start bombing Iran and join in, and the online right, who apparently, these are the people who hate refugees, but don't actually understand that their love for watching Muslims being blown up in a country of 90 million people, and also a country that is home to, remember, the most refugees anywhere in the world. This could easily, you know, obviously lead to destabilization, civil wars, and of course that means mass displacement of people. And it's the same online right-wingers who are talking about consistently that their entire, you know, belief platform, their entire world is built off of anti-immigration, but then they continue and repeatedly continue to egg on things that cause mass displacement of people. Where are they going to go if a civil war breaks out, when there's a power struggle, when people are displaced? They're going to go to other regions. They're going to come to Europe. They're going to go to other parts of the world. And when that happens, they'll be like, oh, nothing to do with us. It literally sounds like the 2000s all over again. Like everything from the right-wing media egging it on, to just people not understanding the consequences of what happens when you get involved in something like this. Not just obviously from, you know, the hundreds of people who died from the UK during this period and the wider NATO, but the literal millions who died in the Middle East too during the last 20 or 30 years. People just have, for some reason, short memories. And of course, we've got those on the left who obviously clearly remember the early 2000s and can clearly understand what Western intervention does, what it leads to, and are, of course, you know, generally anti-imperialist, anti-war. Obviously, we're upset with Starmer for allowing the use of the bases for defensive purposes, and then, you know, not standing up to Trump hard enough. Because even this is still, you know, what was the phrase that he just used in that clip? It was like, you know, Trump has expressed his disagreement. We're talking about, you know, there's like 12 countries right now that are like all fighting and having been bombed. And it's like, we're talking about expressing disagreement. Yes, he can never win because he'll never make everyone happy because of the way he makes decisions and the way he continues to make decisions. But, you know, the one thing I will say, I don't really envy anyone's position, right? I don't envy the fact that, yeah, Starmer is still technically relatively new politician. What was it, 2015 when he came in? 2015, I think. And it's not necessarily his fault, that after decades and decades since after World War II, we've essentially let America's tentacles wrap around us so much in the rest of the world that they have such power over us that we can't basically do anything anyway, really, if we say no. We've won sometimes when we've said no, but most of the time we essentially just have to do what they say because they'll get their way one way or the other. And I don't envy being in this position, but we can still criticize the decisions that he's making. Samuel, what do you think Starmer should be doing? Big question, but what do you think he should be doing? Should he be just going full Spain on this, just being like, no, don't care what you say, we're doing what we want to do?
Yeah, well, that would be the goal. Obviously, as you've said, there is an entanglement between our security services in the United States, and I think this doesn't necessarily all fall at the doorstep of Keir Starmer, because obviously you've had lots of previous premierships and people in Downing Street who have given the United States what they've wanted for various different reasons. But I think what's clear to me is that the whole establishment, especially on the conservative, the right-wing media, have learned absolutely nothing from, and I guess this is not surprising because that's their job to not learn lessons, and if to learn any lessons, not the right ones, but of the Western imperialism, the Western interventionism that has a history of failing time and time again, and having a huge cost, as we discussed earlier, on civilian lives. I think this is what to me is the most disturbing part of it is that these right-wing hosts can say anything from the comfort of their own homes, right? I'm in the comfort of my own home, but at least I'm advocating on behalf of people, who I don't know. But these right-wing hosts seem to think that coming into these countries that they don't agree with, for whatever reason it is, I clipped a video today where I think his name is Sir Richard Dalton. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But he went head to head with Nick Ferrari and basically told him to his face that, what are you talking about here? Do you want the law of the jungle to return to the international order? There has to be an international order. You can't just be the country with the biggest weapons wakes up one morning and says, right, I don't like that country and I'm going to go in. We have to have a system in place where a country can't just decide that they can do that to a smaller country. That's the international system we've at least tried to pretend to uphold. And now we see it crumbling before our eyes. And you'd think that all these right-wing, hosts who talk about how Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East would try to uphold some of these values. But it just shows that they're all full of, well, you know what.
Yeah, it's what they never truly understand the consequences. It's ideology first and consequences later for these people. They simply don't care. The fact that people like Farage and Kemi Badenoch and obviously just the entire right-wing media ecosystem just want to jump straight into this just tells me that they don't really care. It's not really, I don't think it's spoken about that much, but I think, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, it was obviously under Ed Miliband, right, that he helped lead the way, and people again can correct me. My part of modern political history is a bit up and down here. That we essentially stopped us from being more directly involved in Syria. Technically, we are involved, and we still continue to be involved. I think we recently did some airstrikes with France, if I remember correctly. But ultimately, that did not turn into, for us, a ground invasion or anything bigger because of the very recent memory of the early 2000s. We don't want that again. And we need to kind of harvest into that and manifest the fact that there are many people, who remember that period very clearly. It led to the biggest protest in UK history to stop this from happening. And we should constantly remind people of what happened during that period. Obviously, it's sometimes hard for people to sell people on the idea of how many people may have died on the other side in terms of civilians in whichever country that we're talking about. I think the best way to sometimes do it is to talk about the effect that it has on us directly. I think you have to appeal to people's almost selfishness in that way. But you can appeal to people in different ways depending on what they care about. And we can talk about the massive loss of civilian life that happened over the last 20 years in the Middle East. And obviously, happy is not the right word, but there's a part of me that I'm glad that any time anybody thinks of Tony Blair, just for even a second, the first thing that comes to your mind is Iraq. The first thing is Iraq. His entire legacy is tarnished forever because of that, and nothing will ever change that. And I'm glad that exists for him, because I think it's probably part of what might be driving other people like Starmer right now not to potentially get directly involved, because people are very aware, because we're still living through his living legacy of what happens to a person who follows America into the Middle East or anywhere else, up until a point anyway. So I hope that stays at the front of his mind, regardless of what anybody says. And I think we should even still support him to an extent of making sure that he sticks with the idea that we're not going to get directly involved, and push him to stop even letting the Americans use our bases for anything. But right now, we need to be making sure that we're not involved in this in any way. And anybody else shouldn't be either. We should be supporting countries like Spain as well. But I guess we just don't know what's going to happen, do we, Samuel? This could, again, as I said, could turn into civil war, could turn into mass destabilization. It could turn into a ground invasion from the US. Who knows? But I guess we'll have to see, right?
Yeah, I mean, Iran has already responded and said they want this to be very costly. They recognize that diplomacy has failed. And if we're being honest, Iran has every right to feel that way. You know, we can talk back to 2018 when they've been in good faith talks with the United States, with third party actors. Can't remember the state that it was. Was it Oman? Or I can't remember where.
Yeah, Oman's like a broker for a lot of
they
things.
were a broker, and one of the negotiators said, "Look, we." Excuse me. They said they were struck. Essentially, Iran was struck when they were doing the negotiations. In the midst of negotiations, people were begging the United States. This is the clip that went out earlier on the Canaries page as well. People were begging the United States and Israel to take these negotiations seriously, and quite clearly they didn't.
Yeah, sorry, and I was just reading a very interesting comment. There's so much discussion in the chat, and we'll obviously get to that very soon. I just hope that I can hope it doesn't escalate, but I just can't see it going any other way. But all we can do is wait and see, and making sure that we're holding people accountable as much as we can. But we will jump on to the last story. Were you going to say something else then, Samuel? Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing. I was just absolutely.
Yeah, we all need to be very loud right now. Very, very loud. We'll see what happens. This is day 5. This is day 5. But before we move on, it's 2026, and we really want this year to be a big one for Turn Left. We want to be more ambitious than last year, and to really put us on the map. So we would like 2026 to be the year where we can have a studio, and for our contributors to be paid for the work that we do. But either way, we love it anyway. Your support over the years has been amazing, and we have all we're ready to really try and take this to the next level. So we do rely, obviously, on small donations. So if you want to be a part of a media organization that seeks to destroy the oligarchs, then please head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can support us monthly on Patreon, or there is another link for a one-time contribution. You can also become a member on YouTube for 99p. And just remember, like the video, engage, interact, leave comments. We're almost at 40,000 subscribers on YouTube, so if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do. And let's quickly do the final story, because I want to get to my favorite part, the comments. But we have to talk about this because they're still doing the same thing. The UK government has announced an emergency break on student visas for countries Afghanistan, Cameroon, Myanmar, and Sudan. After officials have said that the route was increasingly being used as a pathway to claim asylum. I didn't put this in the notes, but just, by the way, ongoing genocide right now in Sudan, ongoing genocide in Myanmar. I'm not too familiar with, obviously, the current situation in Cameroon. Obviously, we know stuff that's going on in Afghanistan, but we're literally, closing the door to many people who are literally going through war crimes, mass atrocities, genocides that are still being currently adjudicated on. But after officials said that the route was increasingly being used as a pathway to claim asylum, we wonder why. Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood has said that the decision followed a sharp rise in asylum applications from people who originally entered the UK legally on study visas. Now, according to the Home Office, about 39% of the roughly 100,000 asylum claims in 2025 came from people who first arrived via legal routes, including study and work visas. And a government spokesperson said that the government is clamping down on the abuse so the UK can maintain its ability and proud tradition of helping those genuinely in need. Now, Shabana which of those people aren't in genuine need? Obviously, if you are lucky enough to have the resources while you're living in one of these countries, especially Sudan and Myanmar, to have the ability to legally come to the UK, which means you probably still have some resources available to you to come here legally to try and get to a safer country and claim asylum. What is wrong with that? Really? Yes, there is always a point of how many people can we help, but I don't think we're at a point where that even should be a discussion. We opened the doors immediately and widely when the Ukraine crisis started, and we did this very quickly. And we're now cutting off routes for people who are literally going through multiple genocides in multiple countries. The policy will stop new study visas for nationals of those 4 countries, while work visas for Afghan nationals are being halted. Now, ministers argue the move is necessary to prevent abuse of the immigration system and restore confidence that visa routes are not being used as a backdoor into the asylum system. However, the decision, of course, is already controversial. Campaigners and refugee organizations warn that the ban could remove one of the few safe legal routes for people fleeing, and it's going to potentially probably lead to more people just taking the boats, more lives lost. I can't remember what the latest figure is, but I think it's now into the tens of thousands for the people who've died crossing bodies of water in and around Europe over the last year. I don't know the exact number, so I don't want to quote it, but it's in the tens of thousands. I know that much. Critics have also point out that the countries targeted, Afghan, Myanmar, and Sudan in particular, are experiencing, war, military rule, severe instability, which in many ways we support and fund in lots of different ways, indirectly and directly. Our weapons have been found on the ground, meaning genuine refugees may have fewer options to reach safety. Samuel, why are they still chasing these right-wing voters to try and, constantly show how tough they are being? It's not worked so far. The poll ratings haven't changed. They don't seem to be impressing anyone. Maybe Shavana is. I've heard some, when I say good things about her, generally the political establishment is, praising her in some ways. But why are they doing this? They're not going to win any voters over it.
Well, I happen to be more, maybe, I don't know if I'm more cynical. Maybe we're as cynical as each other, but I think it's deeper than just, I don't think it's about winning elections. I actually think that they know they're not going to win any future elections. I think the Labour Rights Project has always been in service of capital. It's always been in service of business interests. It's always been in favor of providing a distraction, anything but, taxing the super wealthy or having a focus on the super rich. So anything that kind of continues the establishment's conversation about immigration or how we need to, be more tough on this or tough on that, I think plays into the establishment's handbook, and I think that's why they're doing it. I think the Labour right have always worn their intentions on their sleeve, in my view, and serve business and are not on the side of workers. So when I see them participating in what the Tories do, it's not surprising to me because I see them as Tories myself. So
yeah, because the thing is, it goes back to the way they can't win scenario, right? Let's just say if we've had, they said around 100,000 asylum applications in the last year. I think if that number was 20,000, I think the media would still dig for the stories of
sure.
The unfortunate circumstances where an asylum seeker does do something wrong or illegal or even horrific and terrible, because this will always happen. And it's nothing to do with asylum
Think about the story about Lake and Riley, for example. Think about Lake and Riley in the States. How this was a horrific thing, that act of violence that happened against this woman by an immigrant, and the right seized upon it and used it as this is it. See, this is why you can't trust immigrants. But I think this is what the right does. They're always going to seize upon these instances, and they don't deal in facts and proportions and the context. There's no context, obviously. This was a horrible incident, but the point is, they want to use these incidents to tar whole entire communities of people, and it's just wrong. Sorry, you were making a point.
No, it's fine. I think, if there was actual genuine data out there that showed that particular people from particular countries actually showed a genuine, when I say genuine, I mean completely and utterly disproportionate, I mean a disgusting and high amount of crimes, then maybe there could be some sort of argument and discussion for it, but it's just not true, because all the data out there is completely weaponized. And when you actually properly look at the data and look at people who handle the data fairly, it's not disproportionate in any way. And again, I always bring this up because I think it's so important to go back to this time constantly, because it's the one thing that's drilled into every single person who gets brought up in the UK, is that World War II. Go back and look at the Daily Mail articles from the 1930s, right before the war started, and you had Jewish people fleeing at that point. And this was before the camps, right? This is before people were being mass exterminated. This was just the idea of being under threat, right? Being persecuted. That they came here, I think it was 60, 70,000 that we took in over the period. And you had the Daily Mail literally writing headlines saying so-called refugees. They had headlines talking about how crime seems to have gone up a little bit in this area where the Jewish people have come. What a coincidence. It's the same old story. It's the same old tricks that these people will play. And, I just don't get how we have this drilled into us so much, but people still fall for the same old tricks. Because obviously, a big part of education around World War II in the UK is not just learning about the actual war itself, but it is learning about the propaganda, right? You learn about the posters and the way they depicted Jewish people and the way they kind of weaponized them and the way they try to make men fearful of the women and children. It's the same story and the same rhetoric, but people still keep falling for it. And it makes me scared because, people will just say, oh, people will just be so much better if everyone just had better education. It's like, well, in all fairness, I think World War II is the most extensively covered topic in British education, right? You start learning it very deeply and intensely, or I did at least, from year 7 to year 8 to year 9, and then you continue it in year 10 if you choose to do a GCSE in it, right? It's extensively taught. So what else can we do, Samuel? What else can we do to teach these people?
Yeah, I mean, I also it's a hotbed of issues, isn't it? Because there's also deprivation and also education not being funded to where it should be as well in many communities as well. And I just think that there is this element of, like, when you deprive a community of the necessities, that's where hate and poison can fester, because you've deprived the community of what they want, and then that's when all these ideas can spread. So I think that it's part of it is that we have deliberately been led into this situation where people are more easily able to be manipulated and to be to have strong grievances, right? Because a lot of this is based in the fact that they feel left behind. They feel that why is one particular community able to access things that me as a native born person cannot access? That's a big part of the grievance culture. And a lot of these things could, as I have always been saying since I can remember, trace not back to influx of immigrants. It's actually related to the underfunding of public services and the siphoning of that money to the super rich. And I think that it always comes back to that specific argument. And I think that's what we have to continue to fight on. That I think that's the strongest argument of the left. And I think you saw it pull through in Gorton and Denton as well just the other day, because I think that it puts working people at the center of it, of all ethnicities, of all backgrounds.
Yeah, I'm trying to be like devil's advocate with it, because some days I'm kind of, obviously, I'm a working class guy from the north, and I'll tap into the people left behind, but some days I'm angry over the last few days. I'm angry that a bunch of these people who can be put into the same category but not exclusively, are egging on a war which will make the world worse, which will make them poorer, make other people poorer, and cause more people to die, more people to be displaced. I get angry and I get frustrated how people are just following essentially the instructions of just very rich and powerful people, and they can't see the forest for the, oh god, what's the expression, they can't see the
forest from the trees.
Thank you. You can't see, yeah. And it just continues to frustrate me. So it depends what mood I'm in, which approach I'm going to go for on the day. But I can't help but I could get into the media system. I could get into media so much. I could.
Yeah, it is a whole ecosystem. People have really been groomed by it, and it's not to absolve people of responsibility, but it is also to say that a lot of effort has gone into making this a thing, this movement. As you know, I need to do some more research into this, but I'm only just starting to get into this whole concept of Ghislaine Maxwell being behind like the like this, behind like a lot of this right wing movement, essentially, and Epstein being behind a lot of this Steve Bannon, Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell being behind a lot of this right wing movement. So a lot of people have been very heavily orchestrating the conditions for these grievances to not only be here, but also to pump the kind of division and stuff. And I think that when it comes specifically to people not learning the lessons of World War II, I think that there are always going to be people who are, let's be real, who are fascists. They're just fascists, and there will always be a subset of humanity, I think. But it's just about how do we offset and make sure that they're not recruiting young men or whatever in huge droves to fill up their numbers, because it is a concerning prospect.
You could support independent media. um, we'll
nice segue.
Segue. Let's move on to the comments, because there's been lots of discussion. Hello, producer.
Hello.
Hello.
People in the chat guessed wrong. It was not Curtis or Callum. I saw a couple of you take a guess at who it was who was calling Lewis Tim Pool for the beanie, and it wasn't Curtis or Callum. It was me. And we got a few comments like that, which is pretty good.
I would make
do
a
like
fabulous right-wing grifter. Thank you very much.
Yeah, funnily enough, people were saying in the chat, can't believe what a lefty Tim Pool has become, from Michael there.
My hair is a mess because I've been so busy. I haven't got a haircut. My skin is breaking out all up here, which is why I'm wearing a hat today. I'm just a mess. My life's a mess right now, guys.
I can confirm that Lewis does have hair under there, unlike Tim Pool. So there's a great meme of who is it? So Game of Thrones fans in the chat will be able to help me out. Meryn Trant, that's it. Meryn Trant, when he's doing the like too young thing, and somebody's changed it to too bald. And I send that to people quite regularly who annoy me. If somebody annoys me and I see that they're bald, I send them the too bald meme. But yeah, sorry.
I just have flashbacks to the Meryn Trant scene now with Aya.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yes, it's horrific. But anyway, that's well off topic. Although, to be fair, not any more horrible than our regular politics these days, if you've been reading anything to do with the Epstein files. That aside, let's go on to some of the other comments. We should probably start with the donations and super chats. I'm all over the place tonight. Right, so Deus X kindly donated 5 Turn Left memberships. Thank you so much, Deus. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, it's absolutely brilliant. Prince also donated a Turn Left membership. And
lovely. I'm invoking my Yorkshire accent now that I'm back in Yorkshire.
Nice. And so did Adrena and Prince again. So thank you for those donations. Appreciate that a lot. And also Prince donated £10. And the comment just says £10 from Prince, which we appreciate a lot.
Thank you. You can put questions there too. We will answer them.
Yes. Yeah. Please do. And yes, and it's great to get donations from the royalty. Abolish the monarchy. Let's go on to some of the
working on it
for the show. Yeah, working on it now. Okay, Jacqueline said, I've never been to Dubai, nor would I want to, but the wealth inequality seems way worse over there than it does even over here or the USA. And this I highlighted this comment because it was this one. Let me just double check. One of the reasons I wanted to highlight this comment is, did you guys see the clip of Andrew Tate dancing? He was saying me as Iranian missiles fall because he's in the UAE, he's in Dubai. and he was like dancing to some music and smoking a cigar, doing his usual shit. But somebody shared that on Twitter and said that the Ayatollah has the chance to do the funniest thing in the world right now. I'd just like to point that out. That's just sorry, I haven't really got a question linked to that one. I just wanted to point that out because all the comments about Dubai reminded me of that. And absolutely, Jacqueline's right. Wealth inequality is terrible, and the people there who are at the bottom of society don't have a way out.
I don't know if this is true, but this was my speculation. But I remember when it was like the first Middle East death, like outside of like Israel, Iran, I think it was might have been like Qatar or Kuwait or something. And I remember the news coming up saying it was like a Bangladeshi guy. And immediately, the first thing that I thought, and again, I could probably go and check on this, is that that was probably a guy who was forced to continue working during this period, right? All the rich people in those regions will be hiding away in their apartments or even somewhere potentially safer. And what are the chances that they would have let the imported workers whose passports are held away from them, who live in little houses with bunk beds with 6 people inside of them? Many of these people were forced to continue to work during this period, and it's not surprising that the first death in that region, I believe, was a Bangladeshi worker, because they were out on the streets, and I think they got hit by shrapnel. They should have been indoors, as should have everybody have been indoors during this period.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised as well if there was a lot of African workers who were in the firing line for a lot of this who didn't have the support as well, because there's a lot of people from Africa who are working in the UAE, and there's like heavy links to atrocities being committed in the Congo and Sudan through the UAE right now. It's a really like just it's like atrocity on top of atrocity right now, and it is really hard to keep up.
Which is why I just constantly say with this war, literally everybody's the bad guy. Besides, obviously, when I'm talking about the states themselves, everybody is the bad guy.
Yeah, definitely. Although it's important to note, not everybody is the aggressor here. Like,
correct,
Israel and the US are the aggressors in a major way. And like, we should always condemn whenever any side attacks civilian targets and commits atrocities that even lead to collateral damage. Like, that shouldn't even be a thing. But like, Israel and the US started this conflict, and it's important that we reserve a lot of condemnation for them for that. But yeah, sorry, Samuel, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in if you want to jump in on any of that, UAE and.
Oh, yeah, we can't hear you. Oh, you think you're muted, Samuel.
Sorry about that. No, I'm not particularly. I just wanted to say I found it, mildly amusing about the whole tax exile situation, where a lot of people in Dubai, moved there because of tax purposes, and now are, find themselves in this situation. And obviously, a lot of people were pointing out that, I think it was Ed Davey in Parliament was saying that, that this is just, look at the irony here and stuff. So, but no, I don't have too much to add to that. Just to also say as well that I put out a post the other day recognizing that, yes, the UAE are behind a lot of the turmoil and disruption in African countries. With what they're doing there. So if we might see a reduction in violence if Israel and the United States were isolated and they're not able to fund a lot of these proxy groups in Africa. But just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. At the moment it's difficult to know where it's going to go. Like, it's kind of a weird thing, because as much as like Trump is the worst of American empire, he's also the worst enemy of American empire as well, and the states like the UAE that rely on American empire. It's a bizarre situation in that sense. Anyway, should probably get through some of the comments. Actual Intrepid said, I just heard Israel claiming Iran is breaking international law. The irony and barefaced cheek of them. What are we thinking in terms of like international law, and does it really exist anymore?
It exists to an extent. But I think the law always exists in a way which is kind of like a flow that is constantly disrupted by people who can disrupt the flow, right? The same way certain people, a powerful person who could steal, hundreds of millions from a pension fund, right? And maybe go to jail for a year or two, maybe, and then that's because they've got very powerful lawyers and they can bend the law to their will. International law still exists and it probably will continue to exist, but it's just been bent further, more consistently than it has been for a long time. It's always been bent anyway. It's never been really in the favor of all countries, and it's heavily controlled by the people who benefit from it being bent the most. That was a bit wordy, but I think you guys get what I mean, right?
Yeah. I fully get what you're saying.
Very
Samuel,
wordy.
sort of like opinions on international law and what's
Yeah, I
left of
mean,
it.
I think that I'm of the opinion that it did exist to some extent. Obviously, there was some, growing up, I felt like I was in an era where I watched the war in Iraq happen. So obviously, I understood that, the bigger you are, the more you can flout international law. But there was some degree to which countries at least pretended to some extent. But these pretenses, more and more, it's I'm seeing them obviously in the lens of privilege, because obviously if you're a brown person in the Middle East actually going through these things, then international law has always been a complete joke to you, because it's never protected you. You've seen your loved ones die as a result of the United States and Israel flouting international law every single day. So yes, to some extent, countries have at least made some overtures to try to pretend that they're abiding by international law, but I think ultimately it doesn't exist in any meaningful sense that protects the lives of people.
Yeah, because international law, in many ways, obviously, if you look at the ICC, it's incredibly racist. Like, it's racist in the sense of, like, it's not necessarily the institution itself. It's more about the pressure around the institution. The ICC has functioned under many good international prosecutors from the UK to people from various African and Asian countries, and there's been multiple times and examples where they have actually opened preliminary investigations into Western war crimes, and then they disappear after pressure campaigns or subversion. And even though we should be happy that there are many people, if you go and look at the list of people who've ever been indicted by the ICC, I think you could probably argue, I think, that maybe I still don't think there's still technically one what would be classed as a Westerner. Like the closest you could get is like Israel in a sense, that they're so obviously Western aligned and they're practically Western, and also Vladimir Putin, which obviously still isn't the West, but obviously Russia's in Europe. Other than that, it's just all basically African names essentially, and Arabic names from like North Africa and other African countries. They only ever had the ability to go after those types of war criminals, and it's good that those people have. Many of them have been indicted, many of them have been arrested and put on trial and are imprisoned. They've currently recently got a hold of Duterte for his crimes in the Philippines. But look at what happened the second a Western aligned leader, aka Benjamin Netanyahu, got an arrest warrant issued for him, right? We had David Cameron threatening the ICC behind the scenes. We have Israel trying to take down the ICC, and we have America also trying to take down the ICC. The second that system tried to hold them accountable, they've tried to destroy it. And that's what needs to be paid attention to, because the system is good when it works, and it should have indicted those criminals. But the fact that it can't even attempt to go after anybody who is in the West without being destroyed just kind of shows how the world really works.
Yeah, I think a lot of the a lot of support of the high era from international law very much came from NGOs working alongside governments that could put pressure on governments and sway public opinion and that sort of thing. And I think Trump has come out as, and Netanyahu, to be fair, like this actually predates Trump really, and goes back to Biden, by dismissing and ignoring like Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International, B'Tselem, any human rights group, basically any NGO. They've created a scenario where international law doesn't work. And by the way, this will this will fuck up the American empire, because ultimately that American empire is going to get weaker and weaker over time. Relative to China and India, China and India are going to outpace the USA. They won't be able to hard power their way through the next century. And when that inevitably happens, that they could have had a soft power argument. They could have had we've got the NGOs on our side, we've got the human rights organizations on our side, we've got the media and culture, but instead, voters in the USA decided to throw it all out to bring their empire down in flames, and it's the most ridiculous thing. Sorry, guys.
I'll just point out really quickly. Somebody said Serbia ? In the comments. I believe that was done through the ICJ, not the ICC. That's why I think I was using the ICC, because it's pretty much.
I was thinking about Milosevic. People. Yeah, I was thinking about Milosevic. I was like, oh, wasn't Milosevic? Yeah, but you might be right. ICJ. I always get them confused. Michael said, you've left Samuel in the green room. You guys always get the best guests. That's what we like to see. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for joining on Twitch as well. We appreciate it. And while we're on the subject, Jacqueline asks, has Samuel K got his own channel? What is the name of it? If so, I'll put a link in the chat in case people want to subscribe.
Plug yourself, Samuel. What do you do? Tell them more about you. Where can you be found?
Yes. Tell us about yourself.
Oh, you're muted.
He's brilliant when he unmutes, I promise. Go.
I'm on Instagram. It's Samuel K Music. Yes, music, because stay tuned. But on TikTok, I actually found that my account has not been recommended. I saw something on my say your account has not been recommended, so I have to look into that. But on TikTok, it's Samuel K Official, I think. But my main place to find me is my Instagram, where I'm posting regularly now. It's Samuel K Music. So yeah.
Nice.
And also I should also say follow the Canary as well. You can find me at the Canary UK, because I do a lot of videos at the Canary. So
amazing. Right. I think because we are getting late on, can we do like maybe one more?
Yeah, of course. I was going to carry on as long as you needed, but I'm afraid I got up at 4 this morning, so I am really lagging myself. And I should probably go over just a little bit with the stuff to do with Shabana Mahmood. Much as I don't like to talk about Shabana Mahmood, why is she going around dressed like a Disney villain? What the fuck?
I remember when she was dressed up at pro-Palestine protests in 2015.
Yes, yeah, literally.
Just saying.
I'm going to go to Jacqueline once again, actually, and say, Jacqueline said, I just love, and this is sarcasm, that the UK is excluding the refugees coming to this country and that need refuge the most. Starmer and Mahmood pandering to the far right yet again, and Suzzled Snake said, if you support this horrific stuff, you'll just vote reform, etc. Anyway, what's the point? Simple question, guys. Why aren't Labour learning any lessons from Gorton and Denton and from the way that their current voter base is just abandoning them for parties that don't pander to people that are never going to fucking vote for them?
Samuel? Muted
again.
Sorry, I missed that. What was being asked? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was basically saying, why aren't Labour learning any lessons from Gorton and Denton and the polling?
Did you guys notice about the colour change, by the way? Because I was going to see if you guys were going to notice the colour change.
I didn't. But
it's late. It's fine. It's all right.
Yeah. Honestly, my eyes can barely see the screen right now.
Is it blue for Britannia?
What were you saying, Cog? Sorry.
Apologies. Basically, I was saying, why aren't Labour learning any lessons? They've lost in Gorton and Denton by a huge margin. The Greens have overtaken them. They're losing their core support for no good reason, and to chase voters that are never going to fucking vote for them, and they don't seem to understand that these people are never going to fucking vote for them. Why are they doing this? Like, why?
Because they're I think it goes very deep. I think they're compromised. I think it goes into Palantir. I think it goes in deep to Peter Mandelson. I think there's an element that the public don't see yet, but all will be revealed soon.
Ooh, cryptic.
Very mysterious. By the way, can I just add this in? The fact that Peter Thiel hasn't had a bit more scrutiny for the Epstein files in terms of the UK perspective, the fact that this guy has like dozens of contracts with multiple governments at different levels, from obviously all the way up to military down to local policing, and that's still allowed to continue despite the fact that he maintained this massive and deep. I think he's one of the top 6 names or 7 names. He's like one of the top names in the files, as in the most frequented. And the fact that that hasn't got that much scrutiny in the UK, pretty disgusting, I think.
Yeah,
Did we lose Samuel?
absolutely. Yeah, I just Samuel made that cryptic comment and then disappeared.
Sorry, I was about to say that I just need to quickly go downstairs to grab an order, so I have to leave you for a second. I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries. I think what we'll do is probably close out the show.
Yeah, we are running late behind. That's my fault.
Yes, we are running over, and we need to stop making the shows like an hour and a half long. I'm so sorry, guys. Right, let's go straight to. I'll hand back to you, Lewis, and you can close out the show if you don't mind. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Back over. Thanks, Ben. Hello. I'm back in Yorkshire now, so I'm embracing the accent. Anyway, if anybody's up in Yorkshire and has got any lovely recommendations of things for me to do, let me know, because I haven't been here quite a few years. 4 years, not that long. But anyway, thank you for obviously everyone for a great show. Hope Samuel is enjoying his order, whatever he's ordered. And obviously, thanks again to our wonderful producer. Thank you again to the lovely audience. I'm sorry we couldn't get through more questions. The show was delayed. It was mostly my fault. And I will be better. I promise. I've got a massive, big space now where I'm living, so I can stop having to take my equipment down and back up again, and everything will be grand and good. Obviously, there's a lot happening right now. We'll obviously try and bring you the best stories to chat about both abroad and in the UK. Things are going to continue to get crazy, but we will do our best to keep things as sane as possible. We will try. We will be back on Friday. I can't remember who's hosting because I forgot to check before. So it'll be a nice surprise. You'll see on Friday, and who's also guesting. But again, guys, please keep engaged in the comments. Please like the videos. Please subscribe. We're so close to 40K, and we're really aiming for it. Not that the numbers matter. We've got a great audience. We've got great numbers. We've got great engagement. We've got great people. But it's just nice, isn't it? It's just nice to see the 40K. I'll be honest. But thank you again for such a wonderful and great show. We will see you guys on Friday at 7:30 because I'm not hosting, because it won't be late if I'm not hosting. So we will see you then on Friday.